Welcome to Corporate Therapy, the podcast where we unpack the dumb stuff businesses do. We ask the big juicy questions like why, what were they thinking, and then chase down the answers. I'm Matt Anderson, a business designer, aka your friendly corporate plumber.
And I'm Rob O'Donnell. I'm a bit of a people and culture fossil with more grey hairs than wisdom, but we'll see what we can do when we're digging into some hairy issues today.
Today, the topic at hand, which produces more eye rolls but not enough action, is workplace flexibility for frontline workers. Yes, those folks who keep the world turning while the rest of us debate on what Zoom backgrounds. So, Rob, this one is a curious one because flexibility, there seems to be a real disconnect between both what the employees or the frontline workers are wanting and where management's pursuing. Why is this such a problem child?
That's a good question, Matt, and I'm not 100% sure of the answer on it, but we'll give it a red hot go. I think we're still in a new normal. It's not that long ago since we came up with the idea of the essential worker in the middle of COVID, where all of a sudden doctors and pizza delivery folks were in the same category. What I think is interesting is that we automatically assumed that when the pandemic was over, we would just go back to the old way of being. But as the old saying goes, you can't put a genie back in a bottle. So I think what's happening now is that a lot of frontline workers are going, hey, we were the essential guys during the pandemic, and now we're going back to the bottom of the heap. And they feel, and I think rightfully so, like management gave a shit about them when they were the big dogs in the hierarchy, and now that they're back at the bottom, don't care anymore. So I think there's a sort of a justified disappointment with that management haven't leaned into yet. Is that your take on it too, or?
Well, it's interesting we gave a damn about them during COVID. Did we? Did we really? I mean, did pay rises suddenly go up during that period? No, there was the promise of future pay that we're seeing. And we're seeing, at least here in Australia, a number of them saying, okay, you promised this stuff, it's not flowing through, I'm about to go on strike. I think we absolutely praised them with more empathy that we're going through, spent more time trying to care for the well-being, I think, and protect them as much as we could with the knowledge or the limited knowledge we had. But in terms of actually lasting change that would actually imply flexibility in their roles, I don't think we moved the dial at all. And I think so much of the conversation, at least the articles that I read or the research that I say, has defaulted to talking about knowledge workers. It's defaulted to talking about those individuals that if you focus on the outcomes, not just the outputs that are happening, they can be in more control of the day. But close to, I think, just over 60% of Australians, over 58% of Americans work frontline, right? They have to, or at least they have to work, on site. There's no option or no alternative realistically for them. And that's a big ass number. So I think we've got to be really mindful. How do we actually make this work for this crew? Because it's the productivity that's hurting. It is the morale that's tanking. You're just not seeing engaged staff at frontline. I mean, what's been your take on when it comes to engagement of frontline? Are you seeing any deltas that are happening there, Rob?
Well, I mean, I know you've done a bit of research on this, but just from what I'm seeing on the ground, the folks that are told there is no alternative but to be in the office are the ones that are losing the will to live. The folks that are told they can have some sort of hybrid work or even some kind of flexibility, they may not be doing great, but they're certainly doing better than the folks that are where it's dictated to them that they must be in the office or they must be in wherever the workplace is. So I think there's almost an unfairness thing there, where people see other folks taking advantage of flexibility and go, that's just not cool because there's no way I can do that. Or there's management says there's no way I can do that. So there's an element of unfairness in there that I think really rubs people up the wrong way.
Do you think that unfairness is justified, or is it this is just a bridge that's too far? This is an impossible ask, is to try to build flexibility with frontline?
I don't believe in impossible. We can do it. It just takes a little longer. But we very glibly talk about, well, it's just impossible. It's just the way it is. That's the way it's always been around here. All of this sort of stuff. And what that tells me, when I hear those phrases, in organizations. That's the way it's always been. Or we tried this 20 years ago for 3 minutes and it didn't work then, so why would it work now? All of those things are basically saying, I'm not open to innovating this. I'm not open to experimenting with something different. Yep. And the awesome thing about COVID, the one awesome thing about COVID, was that it made us experiment. It forced our hands. It took away all of the barriers that we had relied on up until that point not to move forward. So people would have told you, let's take an example here. People would have told you a long time ago that if you were a taxi driver, you had to show up for your full, usually 12-hour shift. Yeah.
Yep.
And then Uber came along. And when you ask an Uber driver, what's the best thing about working for Uber? Being able to turn on and off the app whenever I feel like it, being able to drive whenever I want to. It's the flexibility that is the number one thing every single Uber driver has spoken to me about. Now, is it harder to get a taxi since Uber came in? I would argue it's a little easier. I would argue it's a little nicer a customer experience. So we went from, as a taxi driver, you must show up and do your 12-hour shift, to, well, actually, there's a better way.
But it's a better customer experience, and I think you said it's more flexibility that's got for the individuals. I'm not going to get into the debates of what the pay rates are for the gig economy.
Sure.
This one, I'm sure that might be exciting. But I do. It's interesting we're challenging the notion of a shift versus demand or on demand. But if I look at, say, I go to the a subway on quite a regular basis, probably more than I should. And I see regular faces that are there that greet me. There's a familiarity to it, which is fantastic. But they pretty much turn up, clock in, and have a set number of hours that they need to be here. And I think in Australia, 3-4 hours is the minimum on a shift that you need to be to make an on-site work. Really, do we want on demand for them is going to be less of a viable option? If you look at hospitality, where it's like you're in hotels and you're saying, okay, we want to have the concierge or the bell person or the chefs be able to be there when customers are likely to be there as well. That's why they have shifts. Do you really see a future where that's going to be able to move to an on-demand environment?
I don't know, Matt, is the answer to that for me. I really don't know. I didn't see Uber coming. I didn't see the big disruptors coming. That's why they're big disruptors, right? But in scenarios like that, I don't know, but I don't think that should, our inability to predict the future should stop us from giving it a red hot go to bring it into being. And to me, that's one of the key issues, is that because we have an inability to predict the future, and we do, let's be honest, we suck at it. I remember, was it Alex Luke he was the CEO of a vacuum cleaner company, who in 1955 said that we will all have nuclear powered vacuum cleaners within 10 years. That's how bad we suck at predicting the future. Yeah, I remember Steve Ballmer saying that the Apple iPhone would never get any significant market share. We suck at predicting the future. And because of that, we shy away from changes that might drive us there. So could we have a scenario whereby subway folks could come in when they wanted to and still service the customer? I'm not sure, but that's no reason not to see if we can work it out. Yeah.
And I think that's a nice segue for us to now talk about what ingredients then do we feel need to exist in order for flexibility to thrive? Because I think we've got an opportunity here to actually challenge some of the assumptions that we've got around the ways in which frontline or shift workers work. When it comes to the recipe, I did a bit of Googling, a bit of homework to try and understand what are the must-haves. And there were kind of three things that came out. Number one was autonomy of choice. Number two was transparency or predictability. And number three was more an empathetic leader who got me. I'd love to get your take, first of all, Rob, around autonomy. And why do you think that's so important for flexibility to exist?
So autonomy to me is just the ability to control your own life, whatever aspect of it is important to you. I always think back to Dan Pink's TED Talk anytime I hear autonomy. I remember showing that to a group of executives and they were like, wow, that was incredible. And I was like, that was 15 years ago, man. And nobody seems to have taken this up and run with it yet. But he was talking about things like the fact that there were some businesses that had results only work environments. where you didn't have meetings, you didn't have schedules, you could work whenever you liked from wherever you liked, and all that mattered was your results. Now, I get that that's a bit of a pipe dream unless you're a developer, a coder, that kind of thing. Sure, you can work from the beach in Bali if you feel like it, as long as you've got a computer and internet access. That's the classic example of the knowledge worker. But if you're a doctor working as a junior doctor in a hospital, something like that, I really don't want you performing your trade on me from a beach in Bali, right? So it's difficult. It's difficult for us to give autonomy to the folks that perhaps need it most. But what's interesting to me is I often see all of the autonomy being taken away. So when we worked in call centers, a job where you have very little autonomy in your shift, aside from at one point we went to performance-based rostering, which I thought was awesome. The better your performance was, the better pick of a shift you got, which was an interesting one.
Did that work?
Yeah, absolutely. We had people kicking ass and taking names so that they could have the 4-day, 10-hour shift and have 3 days of the week off, you know? We had some people who wanted to work overnights. We had a 24-hour service for a while. So we had a few people that wanted to work nights, and they would kick ass and take names so that they could pick their favorite shift. So even that offered you a little autonomy. But when we were working in call centers, you had your little cubicle, you were allowed to decorate your pod however you liked. And now what's happening is organizations are going, no, we're hot desking, because that way we only need 40 desks for the 60 people that we have working here, or whatever it is. So even that tiny little piece of autonomy of just being able to stick a photo of whatever you like on your desk is gone too.
You will be able to choose your the casual clothes you're going to wear. I love how that's been sold as a perk in 2024, is be able to wear casual clothes. I mean, for the love of God, that it drives me insane. But I made that mistake. I recall back in 2010, around that period of time, where we were both at Virgin, and it was like part of why we said we paid not the best of wages to staff is because you get to choose the clothes that you want. You can be more casual than our parent organization at the time. But when we made that shift to, hey, let's go join the bigger Borg, I think it was Jason Cathcart who came out and said, so Matt, help me understand, we got paid crap because we could wear whatever we chose pretty much. We're going to move to the Borg now at that point. Are we going to get a pay increase? And it was like, those bastards, they have brilliant memory. They actually are quizzing us on our logic. How dare they at that point? So, but when I look at autonomy, when it comes to, say, context in our operations, which you and I are both very familiar with,
sure,
you talked about autonomy over tasks, over time, over the team that you're part of, over the techniques. That's what is meant to be the best practice in this environment for autonomy to live. It's like, well, hold on, I don't really get to choose the tasks because all the demand that's coming at me is reactive to whatever that customer or that queue is yelling or screaming at me. The time, we're seeing some movement on that, and the ability for be able to put shifts in or put time slots in. The team, not always. Don't see a lot of teams saying, I want to be with that team. Hell no, don't want to be across there. And when it comes to the techniques, you have some degree over that, but often you'll have a core quality program saying, no, this is exactly what you have. So you're pretty much being micromanaged, which is, we appreciate, isn't the best to actually installing engagement. In fact, leads to more stress by employees. What's your take on the realism of autonomy in, say, context and operations?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely spot on with what you just said. We are being micromanaged. The thing for me is that there is absolutely no reason that a call center operator can't be working the way you and I are working right now, sitting in front of their laptop with a microphone and a set of headphones and doing their job from home, or doing their job from wherever. I get that there is a sense of uniformity that a lot of call centers are looking for. And maybe this is the little segue into transparency, but call center management teams or call center operators are often not very transparent with why that uniformity is important. Why? It's almost like an assumption's been made that we have to have everybody saying exactly the same thing because consistency is really important. And nobody's asked the customer if consistency is really important to them. Again, if we put a little customer-centric lens on it, sure, the customer wants the same answer from each rep. They want the same information from each rep, but they also want an opportunity for that person's personality to shine through a little bit. So I hate scripts. I hate them with a passion. And this is coming from somebody who used to manage a call quality program in a call center. We were never about scripts. We were about, did this person do this thing? Did they greet the call appropriately? Which meant there was some gray area in there because what's appropriately? But we had the definition. Did they say their name? Did they introduce the company and offer assistance to the customer? So I could go, thanks for calling wherever. My name is Rob. How can I help you? Or I could go, hi, it's Rob here. I'm with whoever. What can I do for you today? And both of those things were perfect, but there wasn't that necessary uniformity. I think we need to get call center managers, call center operators to really check their assumptions there and see if they're real or whether it's just something that we've done for so long we've forgotten why we're doing it.
I think when it comes to transparency for me, the more you can clue the staff into the bigger picture of what the hell's actually going on, the context or the environment or the challenges you're seeing or the opportunities, the more that they can understand or at least connect with what might be the rationale then behind some of your thinking. And that doesn't matter if you're a nurse that's working frontline, you're a barista, or you end up being in the contact center. Because if they don't actually understand the why are you doing this, they're pretty much going to start to make up assumptions. Well, you're just being a dick at this point. You're just trying to cut pennies at this point. And that's where the resistance really starts to kick in. But it also means it gives them no chance for them to take the self-ownership around how will I respond if that's the context that's going in? How will I adapt my behaviors or my actions? And in a knowledge worker environment, we fundamentally need to tell them what the context is. Otherwise, they literally can't work the outcomes that they know the organization values, right? They've got no clues or guardrails. If you flip that and zoom into frontline workers, that context environment, it's like, this is why service is so important to us. It's the key differentiator we've got against those blokes down the road. I need your help in being able to do this because we're not going to have the cheapest price and we're not going to have the best salami meats as well. I got Subway on the mind, I think, a bit too much there, Rob. But that does then bring on to the challenge. If you don't explain the why and then you make a decision around flexibility, right, that doesn't seem to make sense. Great. So you're telling me we all must be on site? I'm a contact center worker, but I don't need the center bit. I can do this equally from home. Help me understand what I'm missing here. And that's where the bullshit radar really kicks in. And that's where you start to, I think, see the engagement start to crater off a cliff.
There's absolutely no reason that an organization can't be transparent right up front with somebody and go, here's how we operate here. So if somebody told me up front, as a call center rep, you're not going to be able to work from home. You're going to be hot desking. You're going to have to wear a suit while you're sitting there in front of your phone. I would go, well, no, thanks. Your organization's not for me. And I would find something better. But the problem that we face is again, and we've spoken about this previously, is that organizations will put these crazy ads out there going, come and work for the family. And then we find out the family is a bunch of nut jobs. So I genuinely think transparency can start right up front. I also think, and this might tie into the empathetic leadership thing that you mentioned earlier, is that it's important for employees to be transparent with their managers and with their bosses as well. I remember having a conversation with a boss of mine when I was helping her to rewrite policies and procedures. And one of the policies that I came across buried in all of our leave policies was our bereavement policy. And when a close family member, an immediate family member dies, you got 2 days leave. And I just sort of stuck my head over the cubicle and showed her the policy. And I was like, my dad was sick at the time. And I stuck the policy over the desk. I said, just for the record, this ain't going to cut it. And she said, what? I said, 2 days. It's not going to work. I said, I'm going to need weeks to get home and to spend a bit of time with him and all of this sort of stuff. And that's exactly how it turned out, I spent almost 6 weeks at home. But luckily at that point I was running my own business. So the only boss that was down on me was myself.
Yep.
But it was important for me to go, hey, I know this is your standard policy, but it doesn't work. And for me to be brutally honest about why it didn't work meant that she was prepped. If that had happened at the time, Rob wasn't going to be around and we'd have to come to some sort of an arrangement.
But for that two-way transparency to exist, you need some psychological safety. You need to say, hey, this is
shit, yeah.
And how common though is psychological safety from your experiences, Rob? Especially about frontline staff. Like how many go, hey, you're being a douche and here's why.
Yeah. I'm not sure you can see. Oh, I can count on the fingers of one finger the amount of times I've been in a place where there was genuine psychological safety, and even that was just for a portion of that time, not for the whole time that I was there.
So, for those rare moments where you did see psychological safety, one of the things I'm curious about the leaders in that environment. How would you describe them?
I think empathetic is the right word. I think they are individuals who had no interest in their team. What they had an interest in were the individuals that made up that team.
Yeah.
They realized that I was different from you and you were different from me and we were both different from Jason Cathcart. And they were empathetic enough that they could recognize that, what was important to us, and they were adaptable enough that they could adapt their style to the style that we needed in order to succeed. But they also understood why flexibility was really important to us. They understood that, like, I had a boss, despite the fact our standard working hours were 9 to 5, every Wednesday I came in at 7 and left at 3, because I had something to do on a Wednesday evening that she knew was pretty important to me. So she was like, cool, off you go, do your thing. And the interesting thing to me was that she immediately announced to the rest of the team, hey, just so you all know, Rob's coming in at 7 on Wednesday and leaving at 3. And that was great.
But did that create an environment where you were the teacher's pet, frankly? How did she avoid that environment?
So, because she gave everybody else the flexibility they were looking for as well. There was absolute fairness there. Yeah. The reason she did that was so that when I was leaving at 3 on Wednesday, nobody was going, oh, there goes Rob, the half-day merchant. No, he's been in since 7. So that flexibility was available to you no matter what, because we didn't have, not no matter what, but within reason. We were a human resources team. So we needed to be there the vast majority of the time to service the internal clients that we had in the organization, the people that we were partnering with. But a couple hours here and there, she realized it was not a huge deal. And there was always somebody else there to cover you. So that was fine. The problem exists when, as I said up front, that there's an element of unfairness in it where, I wish I could leave at 3 o'clock. But I have this shift that I've got to stay until 5 or 5:30 or whatever it is. I remember having a call center rep come up to me and go, I wish I had the flexibility that you have. And I said, you know what I wish I had? And he said, what? I said, I wish I had the ability to leave work and not think about it until the next day. I said, so there are pros and cons to both of our positions.
But you had a pretty special manager, pretty rare in those environments. What I want to do is kind of put ourselves now in the mindset of managers going, okay, frontline teams, flexibility, and you're after 3 things. You want this autonomy, God help me, transparency, Mother of Mary, and this empathetic crap. And it's like, hold on. If I just look at the autonomy side of things, and you're saying autonomy, I've got to offer more choice, more empowerment to my frontline teams, that's going to add direct costs to my business. I mean, I'd be literally looking at the bill and I'm whizzing up an Excel spreadsheet and thinking, hold on a second, workforce schedule options will need to change. Does that mean I'm going to need to have to change my technology to invest it? I'm going to need to make policy changes, write that, test it. Legal's going to need to spend some time on it. I don't even know what that's going to mean to the equipment. I haven't chatted to IT. Every time I do, they always say it's $300K no matter what I'm asking for. And I am going to probably have to upskill my management and how they manage for staff who are working this hybrid or there's different ways of working. Truth is, insurance even going to cover my options? And will I need to actually hire more staff for the flexibility? I don't have budget for that. So what do you say to these managers who are literally, these are direct costs that they generally feel are going to add if they put in more choice into frontline options?
I say stop. So stop assuming that big dark cloud that's coming your way has lots of lightning in it. But this is the thing. No, genuinely, we assume that it's going to be more cost, and IT are going to charge us this, and legal is never going to get across with legal, and so on. And we catastrophize the whole thing until we go, well, obviously it's not worth it, and we've never tested it. That's how you end up in that's the way it's always been around here kind of mindset. Is we don't take a chance on making a little change. What we see is that it's going to be too hard to get to perfect, so we're just going to stop. When what we should be doing is chipping away at it. We often talk about not letting perfect get in the way of progress. And to me, that's a big deal. If you're looking at offering people autonomy, start small. Give them choice around the things that don't cost you massive amounts of money. Give them choice about the clothes they wear to work. Give them choice about how they decorate their desks. It doesn't have to be anything massive to begin with, but keep chipping away at it. You'll eventually get to the point where you come up with something like the performance-based rostering system that we had, or something like that. Now, I don't really like that because it was a competitive thing rather than a collaborative thing. But there may be some way you can use some other metric to allow people to get the choice of shifts that they want. But the point is simply that we catastrophize it right up until the point where we go, there's no way this is ever going to be worth it, without having tested the single tiniest little piece of it. Chip away at it slowly. That would be my take.
The build on that is we're only looking at one side of the ledger. We're not actually saying, okay, what are the gains we could actually have from this? It's like, if I really held on to staff, I'm not going to need to bother those HR folks who never seem to be available when I need them, because I'm retaining my staff. I'm not having to pay for the training. I'm not having to pay for rehiring simply because I've got experienced staff that are sticking around. Those experienced staff know how to work the systems. They've got their approach down pat. There's a knock-on positive effect to our customers and the experiences that they are having. And this is where you're talking about lifetime values of customers. So there are ways to talk about the financials actually paying off, but you got to be prepared to look at both sides of the kind of equation of both the opportunity and what you're perceiving as the direct costs.
And that's when you're looking at stuff that's reasonably easy to measure, like turnover of employees or even employee engagement. But there's an awful lot of nuanced stuff behind the scenes there where people are just genuinely happier. They're more productive. They're doing their best work. Stuff that's difficult to measure, but is definitely there. So it's definitely a case of short-term pain for long-term gain in most cases, I would think.
But I think the value of different metrics by some managers can be perceived very differently. It's like I measured myself on the budget hitting the revenue targets, and so that's funny enough. What I care, all this fun stuff and laughter. Let's just park that soft stuff. So I do want to make sure that the leaders are being able to look at what are the longer term benefits and the shorter term benefits on a financial lens when it comes to putting flexibility in place. And there is not enough evidence yet around what that looks like in a frontline operations. But when you're seeing it for those that are working in more hybrid-based environments, I think it was McKinsey talked something like a 20 to 30% improvement that you end up having on the bottom line when you actually, to the revenue figure when you've actually got engaged staff. So I think it's one of those ones you're going to have to work at, as you've said. But I'd like to talk about transparency for a moment here, Rob. When it comes to transparency or predictability, what do you think managers would freak out on that one? What would be their concern or worry?
I think a manager's concern when it comes to transparency is always the same. I think it's, what if I'm wrong? What if I tell these people this thing and it turns out to be bullshit? Or what if I tell these people I'm going to do this and something gets in my way and I can't? The fear is it's the standard human fear. It's the fear of failure. It's the fear of being seen as a bit of an idiot. It's a fear motivator. And I think the superpower a lot of managers need to develop is to be okay with uncertainty. To be able to say to folks, here's how I think it's going to work out. However, I might be entirely wrong, but we're going to work at it as if that's the way it's going to work out. And if we need to change direction, we'll change direction, and we'll burn that bridge when we get to it. But again, I think too many times people use, well, it might not work out that way as an excuse to not be transparent at all. We've spoken before about change programs going through where we're not going to communicate with staff until we have 100% of the details. Well, I got news for you. You ain't ever going to have 100% of the details. But I get that fear. That fear comes from, what if I look like an idiot in front of my whole team? So I try or have tried when I've been in corporate roles to kind of preempt that and go, yeah, there's an absolute chance that I'm completely wrong here. But we're going to work at it because I think it's the most probable outcome, and we'll see if we need to change tack at a later point.
Do you feel, though, that when it comes to transparency from a leadership perspective, the reason that, or potentially that they're not wanting to be transparent is because they want to keep the options open? Ironically, they want to hold on to the flexibility. It's like, okay, I don't know where the economy's going next year. I'm not going to talk to staff about whether we're going to lay staff off or where we're going to hire staff. I'm just going to keep it quiet at this point. I'm not going to share any of the rationale behind some of the decisions we've got because we may need to change that decision at that point. So it's like they're reserving the right from being transparent to being deliberately opaque so that they don't get held to account or reduce the perceived resistance they're going to get if they're, this is how I think it's going to be. This is the outcome. Here's the rationale.
Absolutely. And if they're in that kind of mindset of stay on your toes because all the demands could change tomorrow as the context changes, all that is a recipe for inducing anxiety in their teams. If you don't know what's coming next, if you can't prep for it, if you know there's a fair chance that what you're doing now might not be what you're doing next week, all that does is breed a whole heap of anxiety. Now, you show me, I've had my fair share of time dealing with anxiety. I wasn't doing my best work at that time. I can guarantee you that. I wasn't as productive as I could be, wasn't as happy as I should have been, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's another example of a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're trying to hold back because you don't know how it's going to end up. And in holding back, you're actually making it worse.
Because I think the build on from that is if you're a staff member and you say, well, hold on, I've not seen the transparency, which means I have no predictability. I have no, like, do I buy a house? Can I send my kid to the school? Like all those life decisions start to become really hard to make because your perceived of risk factor is much higher. So I think that the tension is who's going to bear that risk from is it going to be the organization? Is it going to be the employer? When it comes to transparency.
Yeah.
I think when it comes to that leadership, though, of saying, I'm going to be empathetic, I'm going to understand my team and what drives them, boy, it sounds like a lot of work. I mean, and what happens if they want something? I mean, Rob wanted his Wednesdays off or Wednesday afternoons off. What happens if Sally then wants something similar or Tony? I'm conscious around the downside of if I have to do that amount of navigating for all these different requirements, really, that just breeds complexity. It's going to slow things down. What's your take on that, Rob?
So like you said, I was lucky enough to have a boss who gave us some genuine psychological safety. How she did that was with fairness.
Yeah.
But she also, if I asked for one thing and then somebody else asked for the same thing and we couldn't both be gone at the same time because one of us was the backup for the other one, she'd just sit the two of us down and go, you can't both be gone. You guys work out who's going to be gone next Wednesday and who's going to be gone the Wednesday after that. And of course, we would very quickly come to, right, well, I'll have every second Wednesday afternoon off and you can have every second Wednesday afternoon off and we'll cover each other. We felt so cool inside the team with each other that we were willing to sacrifice what we wanted in order to make sure there was fairness in the team. But that didn't happen overnight. It took ages to build this up. So you're right, this is hard. And it's complex. And there are 8 to 12 little weirdos who all have differing priorities that you've now got to manage. But I hate to say this, but that's your job. right? Your job is to be painfully curious about those individuals, to learn what makes them tick, what motivates them, to do what you can to bring that into being in their work life, to give them some sort of a sense of their mastery of their role and some purpose behind it, and to give them a little bit of autonomy to do it the way that they want to. Just like our old mate Dan Pink said back in whenever the hell it was, 15 years ago. So I get that it's tough, but if you want to be a leader, it's tough. Right? It's a huge privilege to look after a group of individuals like that. If you nail it, they will be your friends for the rest of your life. That they are the sort of people that would follow you into hell. But it's not easy, and nor should it be. Is yep. my take on it. You're navigating the weirdness of people, and it's a wonderful thing to do. But it is tricky. I think some people have a natural predisposition to it in yep. the fact that they are painfully curious about people, whereas I think others have a natural antagonistic approach to it, where they're like, I just care about the numbers, and yep. I have been given these useless flesh bags to make it happen, and those people shouldn't be leaders. They should be the strategists, but not necessarily the leaders. I think that's really, really important. Is to bear in mind that it's not easy for leaders, but it's a privilege to get it right.
I think it's interesting too about the leaders of the team. I get that. When you start though running operations or whole businesses, you're having to start talking about, how do I scale this concept, right? And so what may work on a small team over here, suddenly you have to offer fairness and equity across the whole organization. That's where it starts to get really complicated on some of the trade-offs, because each constraint each team is different. So I want to do a bit of digging to kind of say, well, what are ways of getting Frontline at scale to get some degree of flexibility? And I managed to stumble across a study that was by Gallup, and that actually looked at right. both what companies were offering, and at the same time, what would make staff want to leave for their offering to secure it, right? Which I thought was quite a nice take on it. But the findings
an interesting way.
that came back were a little bit surprising for me. And so one of the things that was the more expected and was valued or loved was they got to choose their days of work. Right? And I'm like, okay, because a lot of the rosters I've seen that's been built, it's like, these are your days. No, you're not going to have these days. So to say that now it's becoming more the norm is to be able to choose your days was a bit of a surprise for me. The second one that came out, though, is really differentiating, which is rare as hen's teeth, but was glorious if it could actually happen, was when it was either getting more paid time off, more holidays, or this elusive 4-day week, right? And I'm not really surprised on that one. If I could get the 4-day week, I'd be all for that. What was more common but wasn't really lighting people's fires was like they can switch their start or the end times, which you gave the example, that worked for you. They could have more the choice of what hours within the day they're wanting. They could come in their jeans. It's like 2024 and we're still talking about casual clothes. Mother of Mary. So even though these were common around hours within a day and what you can wear, it's really not working for staff. It's like not being a big change for engagement. And the nice to haves, which were not offered a lot, but also not really valued that much, was interesting around remote work. So, or shorter hours and work at any location within on-site, right? So hot desking would be another conversation for it. But it was that remote work one, the not being so much up for that, like having the choice was kind of a surprise for me. But it's like in relative to days off, like being able to choose what days off I've got 4-day weeks versus choosing can I be remote. That's why you're starting to see it being less offered, but also less valued. I could appreciate that. What's your take on those findings though, Rob?
I think that whole let me choose my shifts thing has been a big deal since as long as I can remember, since I started working in call centers in 1995. It was when I arrived first, we actually had a 6-day week followed by a 5-day week. But the 5-day week was short. Yep. So we did I think it was an 8 until 3 from Monday to Friday. And then we were off until 3 the following Monday. Yeah, yep. So we got a real long weekend, but then you worked until whatever it was, midnight on the Friday, and you were back in at 8 on the Monday morning. So you had a really short weekend. So we used to love the really long weekend and hate the really short weekend. You could actually watch the absentee charts just go like that. And then we brought in, well, okay, all of these shifts are available. Start telling us which one you want. And everybody went for the 4-day, 10-hour shift. I was chatting to a friend of mine who's an assistant psychologist who is looking after people with autism.
Yep.
And they're currently doing a 24-hour shifts, 3 24-hour shifts a day. Now, you work for 16 hours and you sleep for 8, but you're on site, right?
Wow.
So what they were hoping for was I can work Monday into Tuesday, Tuesday into Wednesday, Wednesday into Thursday. No, is that right? Yeah. They basically work 3 24-hour shifts in a row and then have 4 days off. That's what they were hoping for. But the shift that they got was I'm working Sunday into Monday, and then I go home and I work Tuesday into Wednesday, and then I go home and then I work Thursday into Friday. So their time off in between those shifts is practically useless to them because they're just getting used to being home when it's time to go back into residential. Sorry, go ahead.
Speaking of useless, I need to let the dog out that's going at this point in time because he's just in the background. One moment.
No problem.
And we're back.
We're back. Thank you, Archie, for that little prelude. But I think that ability to choose your shifts has been there since the dawn of time. Why haven't we got that figured out yet? It doesn't sound that hard. And even if it's one of the things that we talk about when we're training call center reps and in how to deal with difficult customers is to offer options. That's one of the things that we say. Offer options. That gives somebody a sense of control over their own destiny, makes them far less likely to be angry. We're teaching call center reps to do this, and then we're not offering them any options. And it's not just call center reps. It's anybody who's on a standard shift. You know?
But it was interesting the way that you talked about sort of resolving the different, like who's going to get what shifts, and the choice on it is when there was a tension, it's like, oh, let's let the staff work that out. Have you ever been in the situation though, Rob, where the staff, shall we say, couldn't work it out?
Oh, I've seen muskets at dawn. You know? people's parentage called into question, all sorts of things going on around shifts. I've actually seen conspiracy theories pop up in call centers around shifts where they'll go, oh, that's only because that person's been sucking up to the COO. It's not what you know, it's who in this place, which was absolute bullshit. They were completely ranked based on measurable metrics. But that sort of stuff happens. Yeah, absolutely. But I think, as you said, the leadership needs to take a little bit of responsibility for that, because anytime there's a competitive environment, anytime there's something that's likely to get somebody's back up, it's almost like they're Caesar in the Roman Empire. Let's just throw the gladiators in the ring and see who comes out on top. Whereas when it's all perfect and wonderful and reasonable, management are more than happy to take accountability for it. I always thought that the competitive approach to getting the right shifts was a horrible thing to do. But it is, as you say, it's sort of indicative of what often happens in business where there's likely to be some sort of animosity around it. Well, we throw the responsibility to that back on the people who are affected by it.
But I think if you're a manager, you're not too confident in your abilities, the thought of being able to open up Pandora's box of flexibility with suddenly staff are potentially at each other's throats because they're not being able to get that desired shift that they needed. It's like, I just want to avoid all that crap. Everybody, are we going to lock this down? We're going to get everybody on site. I can see where they are. I heard it described the other day as that's the laziest way to manage.
Yeah.
And I'm just keen to get your take on that, Rob.
Yeah, I get that it's the laziest way to manage, and again, what you're doing is you're trying to reduce the chances of this animosity between people coming into play, the Pandora's box of competition or whatever it is, and in the way that you're doing it, you're much more likely to bring it into being. The dissatisfaction, I mean, of your employees. One of the things to bear in mind, and one of the things that we found out after we moved away from performance-based rostering, was that people have different preferences. So what we used to say to folks was, give us your, here's all the shifts that are available.
Yep.
Tell us your top three. And when they told us their top three, 99% of the employees that worked there got their first or second choice. Yep. Because some folks wanted to work nights and some folks wanted to work days and some folks wanted a mid shift because they had other stuff to do outside of work. If you just ask people what they want, the chances are they'll work it out for themselves. And there's no animosity there to begin with. But we feel like we have to reward people for doing an awesome job, or we just have to go, no, in an effort to be completely fair, we're just going to give everybody the same thing and they can suck it up. But I think you're right. It's the laziest way to manage. One of your jobs as a leader is to get your head around what motivates individuals. And you'll find it's very, very different in each case.
I pity the poor workforce planners, though, that are sitting there going, okay, Tommy wants it. So being able to balance those, okay, we've been able to get 90% have been able to get the first or second choice, but the 10% of you suck at that point in time. Does that mean next month I need to rotate that 10% across there so they get the first or second choice? And there'll always be Tommy who's missed out for 3 months in a row on flexibility. It's like, it is complex. Like, I think there's no hiding on that. And we don't have all the answers. So when you don't have all the answers, we always default back to, okay, how can we run a series of experiments? And so I'm keen to kind of get your take, Rob, on for organizations that do have frontline workers, how would you encourage them to be able to set up experiments around flexibility?
I think the main thing that I would encourage them to do is, we mentioned this earlier, don't let perfect get in the way of progress. Start small, chip away at it. It doesn't have to be perfect tomorrow. It just has to be 1% better than it is today. So when people are crafting experiments, and maybe this is a hangover from high school or university or what have you, we want something big to happen. We want the explosion in the lab, or we want the weird pink foam to shoot out the top as the steam goes everywhere. Experiments don't need to be like that. Just do one tiny little thing and see what happens. And then add in another tiny little thing and see what happens. So I would encourage people to start really small and just keep chipping away at it over time.
Could you imagine you're a staff member and the boss comes out and goes, okay, folks, we're going to experiment with flexibility. What would be your gut reaction? What would be your going through your mind when you heard a boss come out and say, we're going to do an experiment on flexibility?
I'm not sure I'm the right person to be asking here, Matt. I spent a little
go to
bit
the
of
caller
time.
line. Is it caller number 3? What have you got? Yes.
We might have to, because I studied a little bit of science at university. I've always had a love of science. I mean, science is the way that I approach life. So when somebody says, I'm going to do an experiment, my instant reaction is, ooh, awesome. Let's see what happens here. There's that painful curiosity. And particularly when we're experimenting on people, because that's outlawed by most sciences at the moment. For some reason, we can still do it in business. We're going to experiment on you and see how you deal with this flexibility. They let us away with it because we don't use electric shock treatment anymore. But no, my response to an experiment is always, oh, awesome. Let's see what happens. I know for other folks, it can make them deeply uncomfortable. In the same way that if somebody said to me, hey, Rob, we're going to do an experiment where we're going to see if you can work from 9 to 5 every day at this desk in this building or whatever, I'd go, yeah, no, that's not an experiment I want to be a part of. I enjoy my hard-won flexibility too much. So it depends on the experiment, but mostly my reaction is to go, awesome, let's see what happens here. I, however, think that there might not be a need for the boss to go and announce it. It might just be, we're going to do this experiment over here.
Yep.
We might not even want the subjects to know that they're part of the experiment, to see how they react to us even more. What's the word I'm looking for? You know what I mean? Where they're a control group. That's the one. So that they don't even know what's being done. And then if it works, we can roll it out to the rest of the organization or to similar parts of the organization, that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm not sure there's a need for the boss to announce it. And if they do, I'd genuinely be excited about it, unless it was killing off something I'd already hard won.
So given organizations, though, at least if you're reading any of the news these days, have the trust is kind of fallen off an edge. And so if my boss came in and says, we're doing flexibility and we're going to run some experiments. It's like, why, you bastards, right? What's your
What are you
real
up to?
motivation? What's the suspicious activity that's going in the background? So I actually feel that if you are going to approach flexibility with your teams, I'd be like, we have a problem, which is what? Like, why are you wanting flexibility? Which could be, we keep losing great talent that's going out the door. You're not sticking around. We have a hunch at this point it's because its flexibility is not where it is or needs to be. We don't have all the answers of how to actually solve for that. In fact, we can't find a playbook on it anywhere. And we want to be able to run a series of experiments that can actually see what works for you and what doesn't, but also what works for us as an organization where we are retaining talent. So I think it's kind of, what's the motivation, I think needs to be talked about, because the very next step I think you'd want to do in this environment is to actually involve the team members from very diverse backgrounds, being both those workforce planners that are pulling up here, the team leaders are freaking out and saying, oh my God, I'm going to have completely new ways of working. And the employees going, I don't quite trust you bastards, right? At the point, you want to be able to say, okay, help us design the experiments. What could flexibility look like? What are the kind of options that would be appealing versus a complete waste of time? What are the real risks that are involved with all those assumptions that we've got behind it? I just think that the very fact we've seen in the hybrid environment with the organizations that have taken experiments, the very notion of involving their staff has actually led to a bump in engagement. Right? So to me, if you actually want to get a bump in engagement, start involving your team in the design of these experiments. The bit that I get nervous of, though, when you do that is actually not the frontline staff. It's actually the middle management.
The managers themselves,
Why do you think I'm worried about the middle management, Rob? What do you think my nervous might be there?
Because they need a little bit of help to get this across the line, right? This is, if they're going to be brave enough, and it does take bravery to do an experiment in flexibility where they're likely to get their team to co-design it with them. That takes a leap of faith. And when we've gone from science to faith now, but when you're taking a leap of faith, it's a lot easier to do when somebody gives you a little safety net. So this support needs to go the whole way up the chain. That middle manager needs to be able to rely on their senior manager to go, and hey, you know what? If this experiment doesn't work, that's okay, as long as we learn something from it. That the safety net's there so that they know that they're not going to be hauled over the coals if this goes wrong or if it doesn't go quite the way people expected it to. I was working for an organization recently where I started to get all of these questions when we asked them to do little experiments. And all of these questions were the craziest hypotheticals imaginable, where it was just like, so what would happen if while we were doing this, an elephant in a hot air balloon landed in the office? And we're like, where the hell is this coming from? And we realized pretty quickly, it's like, oh, they're just nervous. They're afraid of what's going to happen if this doesn't work out exactly the way they expected to or they hoped that it would. So what that told us was simply that they perhaps didn't have the support they required from their senior managers to feel comfortable giving this a shot. So to me, that's probably the most important thing. Are your senior managers making sure that there's a safety net there for your middle managers when they're brave enough to give this a go?
Because otherwise, what I see is self-sabotaging, right? Where they deliberately try and tank the experiments to try and gain the answers that they want to see to protect the status quo. So this is the importance of being able to run it across different teams and actually be able to observe what's happening. But it also comes down to how you then choose to measure or observe the evidence of that experiment. What's your advice you'd have for folks there?
You when I get this look on my face that I'm desperately trying not to go down the cynical vortex.
Oh, please, come on.
But it's happening.
Yeah.
I've seen experiment results come back. They're perfect. And then the boss goes, no, I still want to do it my way. And you're like, oh, well, then why the hell did we bother? Why did we waste all of that time? Why did we get all of our hopes up only for you to dash them against the rocks? People like that, they I think the professional term for it is they need to be held to account. There are other words I would use, but don't allow people to get into an experimentation mode if you're not going to allow the results of the experiment to be implemented should they work the way they're expected to. The measurement thing, I think, is probably less important to me as an individual. It's like I don't really care how it's measured as long as that measurement says, yeah, this worked and this bit didn't. And we can use that to tweak the second prototype in our experiment or whatever it is that we chip away at progress, like I've been rabbiting on about for most of this podcast. But I get really, really fired up when either an experiment passes, for want of a better word, validates, and we go, yeah, but we're still not going to do it. Or worse, an experiment is invalidated and the senior manager goes, no, we're going to push it across the line anyway, because that's my little pet project and that's what I told the board I was going to do or whatever. So if you're going to be brave enough to do an experiment, be brave enough to listen to the results of it as well.
Love that. But when it comes to the measurement itself, I do happen to, funny enough, care a little bit about how we approach the measurement. That's very unusual for me. But often I think the default is people look for, let's either do surveys or let's default in terms of looking at what the operational data or the CRM's actually telling us. Right? Those are all legitimate options, but I do believe you've also got to spend some time observing, listening, feeling at that point. And the reason I say is the moment you walk into an environment, if it's shit or not, you actually like that. It's a death knell of quiet. You go into the lunchrooms in particular to see how is it feeling in its space. Is there laughter? Is this the kind of space you'd want to hang out from it? You look at what's happening on the feedback they're actually getting from your customers at this point. Is the experience actually being, well, nobody's turned up to serve me my barista coffee at the morning. I'm completely grumpy at this because I've got flexibility on that shift. Or they were trying to get me off the call as quickly as possible because it was clearly the end of their shift and they were trying to get out the door. Or no, they actually learned the dog barking in the background because they're at home. But boy, did they seem relaxed. And she's saying, yeah, they solved my issue. So I think you're going to be really open as to where the evidence is going to come from and not just take a quant or an operational data. You've also got to look very much at the qual side of things. And I do encourage that because that evidence is an important part of being able to then play back the story to staff. However, if you go play that story back to the exec team or the leaders, they normally have a bias towards, I want the hard data to tell me, right? So If you're going to actually build an experiment, realize you're going to have to need more of the qual side to help the staff understand and connect with because that's how they feel. And you're going to need to have the quant and the operational data to convince this has got substance for the leadership team. You need a bit of both in that environment. That can be hard to build in environments where some of the systems that you have in place don't easily allow you to be able to measure some of the more productivity elements, some of the engagement elements that you've got to have. So being creative right up front in the experiment of how will we measure the outcome and how will we test our hypotheses, I think is an important question for all of the team to be involved in because you can be surprised how staff look for evidence or outcome as well.
Absolutely.
So, Rob, we've now finished pretty much on the experiments being the way to be able to find the answers for flexibility because there is no playbook when it comes to frontline and flexibility and how to absolutely make it work because each industry, each individual is very different in what they could be looking for. But I think what we've both violently agreed on, despite difference of approaches we may take, has been that frontline deserve the same shot at flexibility, the same degree of fairness as those that are trying to hang out in the pajamas on those Zoom calls. Is there anything you'd love to share with the audience in wrapping up today's session?
Just that I think too often we fall into the trap of that's the way it's always been done around here. Experimentation can help us get out of that. And to me, flexibility for everyone, whether it's at a small level or at a high level, is a bare minimum. People are individuals. They need to be treated as such. So do what you can to give them the flexibility they crave.
Well, thanks, folks, for tuning in. Share this episode, spread the word, and let's make organizations a little less batshit crazy, one podcast at a time. Catch you next time.
Stay flexible.